Divers have disappeared in labyrinths so deep that even the best can't find their way out, and deaths pile up in caves, sinkholes, and wrecks worldwide. From freezing passages in Norway to submerged tunnels in Egypt, these are the dives that went tragically wrong. Dion Dreyer grew up in South Africa, raised by his parents Theo and Marie. He was into adventure, fast cars, motorbikes, hunting. He had a knack for making ridiculously loud car stereos. Diving was one of his biggest passions. By the time he turned 20, he'd logged around 200 dives, and during the 1994 Christmas break, he got invited to join a team of cave divers at Bushman's Hole. They were planning a 150-meter dive, and Dion was thrilled to help as a support diver. A couple of weeks before the trip, his grandfather passed away, and around a family barbecue, he told his dad he'd like to go out diving if he had a choice. On December 17, 1994, Dion drowned during a practice dive. He was about 50 meters from the surface when something went wrong. His helmet was found 2 weeks later by a small ROV, but his body was nowhere to be seen. It stayed that way for 10 years. In October 2004, legendary cave diver David Shaw finally located Dreyer's body 272 meters down. 3 months later, Shaw tragically died while trying to recover Dreyer, getting tangled in the line. His support diver, though, Don Shirley, barely survived and was left with permanent balance issues. A few days later, while retrieving equipment, the bodies of both Dreyer and Shaw floated close to the surface and were finally recovered. Shek Exley was obsessed with caves from the moment he first dove in at age 16. Growing up in Florida, he worked as a math teacher to fund his real passion, pushing the limits of cave diving. By 23, he'd already logged over 1,000 dives, and over the next 29 years, he racked up more than 4,000, earning a reputation as one of the pioneers of the sport. Exley was almost legendary for resisting nitrogen narcosis, letting him dive to depths that would have scrambled most divers' brains. He survived a 400-foot dive on just compressed air and helped other divers attempt extreme records. He became the first man to dive below 800 feet in open water. But in April 1994, Exley attempted what would be his final dive, descending toward 1,000 feet in Zacatón, a massive freshwater sinkhole in Mexico. His dive partner Jim Bowen had to abort early when his gas ran low. Exley continued on, but he didn't make it back out. His dive computer read a max depth of 906 feet, but we still don't know exactly what happened down there. Ben McDaniel vanished in August 2010 while exploring Vortex Spring in Florida. He was diving in an underwater cave about 58 feet down. His first dive went fine. He came up, refilled his tanks, and got ready for a second dive that evening, but he never came out the second time. His truck was left at a nearby dive shop with his wallet, cell phone, and a map of the cave inside. Divers searching the entrance found 2 oxygen tanks, but strangely, they were filled with just air instead of a proper gas mix, which is what you'd usually see for a deeper cave dive. It was already a tricky cave with tight passages and poor visibility. It was easy to get turned around in. Even experienced divers who searched the area couldn't find him. Nobody really knows what happened. Some think he might have gotten stuck, had gear problems, or run into some other accident deep in the cave, and some people also think he may have actually staged his disappearance, which feels like a stretch, but I guess it's always possible. Over a decade later, we still don't know what happened. In April 2014, Wang Tao and Wang Yang, 2 experienced divers, went into Juidun Cave in southern China. They'd been diving there for years, slowly pushing deeper each time, and this day, it went down to 166 meters, a little past what they'd planned. At first, everything was fine, but on the way up, things went wrong. Around 120 meters, Wang Tao ran low on air. Wang Yang handed him his regulator, and they started a tense, slow climb, sharing air. They were close to their decompression tanks, but then Wang Tao slipped out of reach, vanished. Wang Yang kept going, gripping the guidelines, switching tanks, feeling vertigo, nausea, and exhaustion, all hitting him at once. Every movement felt almost impossible. It took him hours, but Wang Yang finally made it to the surface. Rescue teams found Wang Tao at 51 meters, probably carried there by the flow of the water. Brett Hemphill spent his life chasing the kind of adventures most of us can't even imagine. First fell in love with caves at 14. I always loved exploring. I was never a kid that was content to watch TV, he said in 2021. Later, he got into scuba diving, letting him explore the deepest, most complex cave systems in the US. And by 2008, he and his team at Karst Underwater Research or KUR, had set a US record, diving 407 feet in Florida's Weeki Wachee Springs. 5 years later, they broke that record again, reaching 465 feet at Phantom Springs in Texas, traveling nearly 1.5 miles into the cave system. In October 2013, Hemphill returned to Phantom Springs for another dive. This time, he descended to 570 feet, tying a guide rope at a key point before separating from his dive partner, Andy Pitkin. According to Pitkin, quote, "I was expecting that he would catch me up at some points. He never did." Days later, crews recovered Hemphill's body from over 450 feet. Back in May 1973, a group of 8 divers decided to explore a flooded sinkhole in South Australia known as the Shaft. That day, the group planned to go deeper than usual. They entered the narrow opening, about the size of a manhole, and dropped down into a chamber about 120 feet below the surface. Everything was fine at first, but as they moved into darker parts of the cave, their light stirred up silt, and with no visibility and no guide rope to lead them back, panic set in. 4 of the divers, Stephen and Christine Millett, Gordon Roberts, and John Bockerman, never made it out. When recovery teams finally brought the bodies up, it became one of the deadliest cave diving accidents in Australian history. The disaster actually changed the sport forever. It led to the creation of the Cave Divers Association of Australia, which set strict safety standards and training rules that are still used to this day. In June 2022, 2 experienced divers, one 63 and the other 52, entered Buford Springs in Florida. Water there is crystal clear. The cave system beneath it is this twisting maze of passages that drop well over 130 feet deep. The men finished their first dive and came up to chat with some teens swimming nearby. One of the teens later said the divers mentioned something about a leaking air tank, but both seemed calm and decided to go back down anyway. That was the last time anyone saw them alive. A short while later, one body was found floating face down near the surface. Rescue teams eventually discovered the other around 137 feet deep, tangled near the permanent dive line. Investigators believe the pair either ran out of air or got disoriented in the cave. Sistema Sac Actun in Mexico is massive, over 235 miles of underwater caves, the longest anyone's ever found. It's a mix of big chambers, tight squeezes, and sudden drops that make it crazy hard to explore. Even the pros run into trouble here. The water is murky, the passages can be tricky to navigate. Divers have lost their lives here. Mapping the system hasn't been any easier. Robots have been sent in, but progress is slow and huge sections are still unexplored. Underground rivers and the chance of sudden flooding make it very unpredictable here. After years of work, no one really knows how much of Sac Actun is still hidden, but we do know that there is some cool stuff down here. For example, they found mastodon bones next to prehistoric human remains, possibly the oldest evidence of humans in the Americas. So the rest of it is definitely worth exploring, it's just incredibly dangerous. The Blue Hole, just outside Dahab in Egypt, has a reputation for being one of the deadliest dive spots in the world. On the surface, it looks pretty calm, but a few meters down, there's the Arch. This is a submerged tunnel that's claimed a lot of lives. Estimates say somewhere between 130 and 200 divers have died there in recent years, but nobody really knows the exact number. The Arch isn't insanely deep by technical diving standards, but it's way past what most recreational divers are trained for. It's dangerous for a couple reasons. The tunnel is longer than it looks, and currents push inward. So if you panic or you mismanage your air, you're in serious trouble. Even very experienced technical divers need to be extra cautious. One of the most infamous cases is Yuri Lipsky, a 22-year-old Russian diving instructor. On April 28th of 2000, he made an uncontrolled descent to 115 meters with just one air tank. He never made it back. A fellow instructor named Tarek Omar recovered his body the next day at Lipsky's mother's request, but along with Yuri's remains were his helmet camera, which had captured everything. But the footage, as distressing as it is, has been used a lot by diving instructors to showcase how easily things can go wrong and how to avoid making critical mistakes. Pluragrotta is this enormous underwater cave in northern Norway, the deepest in all of northern Europe. And even though the area it's in has around 200 caves, most aren't really diveable. Pluragrotta, though, draws more divers than anywhere else in Scandinavia. The water is freezing freezing, around 2 to 7 degrees Celsius. The tunnels are tight, and the passages twist in ways that can make even experienced divers nervous. The cave has a long history. In 1988, a diver tore his leg on a sharp rock and ended up with mild hypothermia. He did survive, but it was definitely a wake-up call that even a small mistake can be serious. On the 16th of August 2006, a Norwegian diver went missing. A team of British divers spent almost 2 weeks searching before they finally recovered his body. And just last year, on April 3rd, 2024, Jared Hirst, a US diver, suffered a seizure deep in the cave. He never made it out. But probably the most famous case happened on February 6, 2014, when 5 Finnish divers tried to navigate a tricky underwater route. 2 of them didn't make it, and the other 3 ended up with severe decompression sickness. Norwegian authorities called in top divers to recover the bodies. It was judged too dangerous, but later a group of Finnish divers went in anyway and managed to bring the bodies out. All that said, I've been your host, James. I'll catch you, yes you specifically, next time.